Okay, ladies and gentlemen, this is video 2 or option 2 on how you can create your laser engraving project using a stacked image method. So last time we looked at the double layered map based off the tutorial video on how to create a complex design as a vectorized image from snazzy maps. Today we're going to look at taking a fairly simple image and just create a stacked logo. So I'm going to go into Photoshop first, show you one method. Then I'll show you a different method using Illustrator, and you can choose how you want to go about making your design as you wish. So I'm going to create a new document to begin with, and I'm going to set my units of measurement to inches. And this time I'm going to work within my complete workspace. So that's a 10-inch by 12-inch piece of material. I'm going to set my resolution again to 300, CMYK color mode, and a background content of transparent, create. And those are just my preferences with the transparent background. You don't have to use it. You can use a white background if you'd like, but I just like the transparent background. But the 300 pixels resolution and the CMYK is going to give you the best results. So those would be my recommendations. So first thing I've got to do here is put my logo or my image in. So I'm going to go to the File menu, choose Place Embedded, and I've got a wordmark logo that I made up here for the school. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this as big as possible to fit inside this workspace. So first thing we do is right click, and I'm going to rotate this image so I can get it to fit inside this document as best as I can. And then I'm going to right click again and choose scale, and then I'm going to resize this image so it basically fills the document as much as I possibly can here. So I'll get that just a little bit smaller so it fits, and that should be good right there. So now that I've placed this image in here, I'm going to right click on my layer down in my layers panel here, rasterize that layer, and this is again just something I like to do. I like to remove the background, so I'm going to use the magic wand tool, click on my background white of the image, delete it so that I'm left with just the transparent background that I worked with from the beginning, and I'll just deselect everything so I'm left with only my image. Okay, so now the next step is I'm going to duplicate this layer, and I'm going to just label this for the sake of the purpose of this option here. I'm going to label this based off the material. So the first one's going to be for the plywood that I'm going to cut out, and then I'm going to duplicate it a second time, and this layer I'm going to title as the acrylic for the acrylic layer that I'd cut out of the plastic. Okay, and then I can double click on the name of my starting image layer, and I'll just call this one original so that I know for frame of reference that's the starting image. So I'm going to hide that layer by clicking on the eyeball icon, and I'm going to begin with the plywood layer, so I'm also going to hide the acrylic. Okay, and then just for the sake of this activity, just because the acrylic is going to be what's going to go on top of the plywood, I'm going to layer this so that the acrylic layer is on top of the plywood here as well. So I'm going to select my plywood layer, and I'm going to start going to work. So for this image, what I'm going to do is cut out the outside edge of this wordmark logo, Titans, but I'm going to also engrave the darker areas, and I'm going to leave the white area as the natural plywood. So what I want to do for this image is I'm just going to use my magic wand tool again. I'm going to select the white of the T, and then holding the shift key on my keyboard, I'm going to also select the white of all the other letters so that they are all one selection together. Okay, now that's the part that I'm not going to engrave, so I'm going to delete that, hit the delete button on my keyboard, and then the other option here that I'm going to look to do is I'm going to then take my blue layer now, select that, and again holding my shift key, I'm going to start selecting my red design features, adding them to my selection. And then once I've got all of these red and blue designs added together here, make sure I don't have any areas that are not selected. I'm going to go to my edit menu, I'm going to go to fill, and I'm going to make sure that I choose my contents to be filled in as a black color fill. And then I did miss one section here, so all I'm just going to do is go back, select that one section, go back to the fill option from the edit menu. Black is already selected from last time, click OK, and then I have everything here set as black. So that now gives me the darkened area for my design that I'm going to trace later in Adobe Illustrator. And this is going to be what I engrave. So all these black areas are actually going to get burnt into the wood with an engraving, and then I'm going to cut out the outside for the shape. And then the acrylic is going to be what fills in the remaining section. Okay, so that's my first layer. Second layer is I am going to go to my acrylic layer, select it, bring it so it's visible, hide my plywood layer, and I do the very same thing. I'm going to choose the white sections of all of my letters and get those selected, and this time I'm going to inverse that selection, so I select everything else. I'll hit delete on my keyboard and delete everything else. I'm going to inverse it back again, and now I'm going to go to that fill menu and fill in the white areas of the letters as black so that these could be traced in Illustrator for cutting out with the acrylic. So now I would save this as an image, save as, and again, make sure that when you're saving this as to take a picture over to the Illustrator program, you want to make sure that you save it as a picture file, so a JPEG is perfect. Give it a name. So again, I'm going to name these based off the layers. I'm working with my acrylic layer, so this one's going to be acrylic. Okay, I can even give it a name so that I know what the image is. So I'm going to call it Titans acrylic. Save that. Again, for my quality, bring that cursor all the way to the right for maximum quality. Save that. Hide my acrylic layer, bring up my plywood layer, and very same thing, save as. Make sure I choose a JPEG or a photo document format type, and this time Titans plywood, so that I know that again that this is for the plywood portion of my design. So that's getting this done in Photoshop to then take to Illustrator, and this would then work by making a new document 10 by 12 inches in Illustrator, create. I'm going to place my two pictures that I just made, so I'm going to look for my Titans images. So I got Titans acrylic and Titans plywood. Bring in Titans acrylic. Bring in Titans plywood. Just push these off so you can see them both. And then I would do the very same thing that I did for the map, whereas I go to the window menu, bring down the image trace, choose one of my two documents, black and white logo, tracing result with outlines, get those paths all the way to 100%, same thing with the corners, take the noise down to 0, and ignore the white, so that all I'm left with is the black that I filled out for my design. Hit expand, do the same thing for my other portion of the design, black and white logo, tracing result with outlines, paths up to 100%, corners up to 100%, noise down to 0, or 1, I should say, ignore the white background area, and expand. So now what this allows me to do is work within my two designs. So keeping these separated so that you know what you're working with is going to be important. The inner area of the Titans words, again, was the acrylic layer. So this layer, all I'm doing is cutting these letters out. So I want to make sure that I have my fill set to no fill. I want a stroke that is a color of some kind, and the thickness of that stroke needs to be 0.25 of a point. And that acrylic layer would be ready for me to take off to the laser engraver and cut out of a piece of acrylic, which could be white acrylic, black acrylic, clear acrylic, whatever I choose. Now for the piece here that's going to be in the plywood, a little bit of a different process. We want to keep the fill so that when we engrave this, the black segments here are going to be darkened by the laser, and then we only want to cut out the outline. So what I can do here is use the direct selection tool, select that entire line, and then change its color so that now in that design, hard to see, but if you see it, there is a red stroke now around the outside of the design. And I can even further tweak that and modify it in the laser engraving platform Engraved to separate this stroke or this line from all the others as being what I want to cut. Okay, and then I engrave the image, cut out the outside, cut out the letters here, stack them on top of the plywood, and that would become a stacked image for my laser engraving project. Okay, so that's using Photoshop to create the layers. Okay, I'm going to show you a second method here using straight Illustrator. So I'm just going to not save this document. We're going to create a new document, same size, 10 inches by 12 inches. And I'm going to go with that original image. So the wordmark logo. I'll place this in here. And then I'm going to begin by immediately image tracing this. So same thing as before, black and white logo, and what you're going to find is it's actually going to convert this into a black and white image automatically for me because it was a very basic design. Complex designs like a photograph, this isn't going to work. So tracing line or tracing result with outlines, paths all the way up to 100, corners all the way up to 100, noise down to 1, and again that just gets me the best results. I could play around with these percentages and pixelations to get me the best results possible, but this is what's working for me because of the simplicity of my design. Now this time I'm not going to ignore the white. I'm simply going to go to hit expand, and this is going to trace all of my areas of my design including the background. So now using the direct selection tool, I'm going to click on the corner of my background and I'm going to hit delete and hit delete again, and it deletes the background square and I'm left with just my wordmark logo. So now back to my regular selection tool, select my design, and just like in Photoshop, I can rotate this design, and holding the shift key in Illustrator, it doesn't automatically proportionally resize, so I have to hold that shift key to tell the program I want to proportionally resize my image. Otherwise what will happen is really goofy images come out like that. So holding that shift key, proportionally scaling my image to fit, and just rotating this to get, again, the best results possible, just like we did in Photoshop, but this time it's directly in Illustrator, making this as big as we possibly can to fill up the workspace. So we'll go with that. Okay, so now this would work perfectly fine as my plywood layer. All I'm going to do is select this design, Control C on my keyboard, or edit and copy, and then edit and paste, or Control and V to then paste a second version of this. What I want to do now is remove that segment here for the outline of my plywood cutout, because that's not going to be a part of my acrylic plywood. So I go back to that direct selection tool, click on that outside edge, delete that layer, and then just make sure that there are no subsequent layers below it. And there we go. I now have my image ready to go. Same thing as before. This is only a cutout, so I'm not engraving. I set my fill to no fill. I set my stroke to 0.25 of a point. Choose it as a color. And there is my acrylic layer ready to go on top of my plywood layer after it's cut out. You can see here that they match up perfectly because they came from the same design, which will get the same results if you do the Photoshop method. It's just depending on the complexity of your design. This was a very simple designed image, so this worked easy to be done in Illustrator. Some of you, based on your design, might have to work in Photoshop beforehand to separate out your designs, remove aspects of your designs, or be able to get it so that you can create these multiple sections. Okay, and even too, I have space left here because again, this is going to be cut out of acrylic, so when I actually go to cut it, that's a lot of leftover areas. I could potentially cut this twice and maybe even have additional inserts that go inside of the letters that maybe I take out of normally being cut from white acrylic, take them, paint them red, inset them in, and then I can add to the colors again. So the inside of the letters would be red like the original wordmark logo. The cutouts here would be cut from the white acrylic, and then the plywood edge would be the outside. That's where I get the wood pattern coming through. or any other number of options based on the materials that you want to work with. Okay, so that is option 2, and this is for making a stacked logo or image in Illustrator for laser cutting and engraving to build your project. Coming soon will be the third option for your laser engraving project, which is going to be a depth image using multiple layers to create a scene. All right, ladies and gentlemen, pitter patter.